In the tranquil town of Cedar Hollow, where autumn leaves whisper secrets, Emily Harper's quiet life with her daughter Sophie is unraveling. A chilling betrayal lurks beneath family smiles, threatening to destroy everything she holds dear. Can Emily uncover the truth before it engulfs them both? The town of Cedar Hollow, Oregon, nestled in a valley cradled by towering pines, wore autumn like a vibrant quilt. Leaves in shades of crimson and gold drifted lazily onto the streets, where the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. For Emily Harper, a 38-year-old librarian, this small town was a sanctuary. Her days were woven with routine, shelving books at the Cedar Hollow Public Library, helping her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, with multiplication tables, and waiting for her husband, Daniel, to return from his project manager role at a Portland construction firm. The rhythm of their life was steady, predictable, and, until recently, comforting. Emily's world revolved around Sophie, whose boundless curiosity and infectious smile could brighten even the gloomiest Pacific Northwest day. That evening, as the kitchen filled with the aroma of roasting vegetables, Sophie bounded in, clutching a piece of paper. "Mom, look at my sketch," she exclaimed, her hazel eyes sparkling. The drawing, a riot of crayon colors, depicted a family picnic under a sunny sky, a stick figure Emily, Daniel, and Sophie surrounded by flowers and a comically oversized dog. Emily's heart swelled as she pinned it to the fridge, the magnet snapping into place with a satisfying click. "It's beautiful, Soph," she said, ruffling her daughter's chestnut curls. "Dad's going to love it." But Daniel's reaction, when he finally trudged through the door at nearly 8, was a flicker of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice, kiddo," he muttered, dropping his briefcase by the couch and heading straight for a beer. Emily watched him, a familiar knot tightening in her chest. For months, Daniel had been distant, his evenings stretching later with vague excuses about big projects and tight deadlines. His once warm hazel eyes, so like Sophie's, now avoided hers, and his responses were clipped, as if her presence was an inconvenience. She told herself it was work stress, construction was demanding, after all, but the doubt lingered like a shadow. The Harper household wasn't the only place where tension simmered. Emily's older sister, Rachel, a 42-year-old real estate agent with a flair for designer clothes and closing deals, had always been the family spark plug. She breezed into Cedar Hollow from Portland for monthly dinners, her laughter filling the Harper dining room. Their parents, George and Clara, retired high school teachers in their late 60s, lived just a few blocks away in a cozy bungalow adorned with Clara's prize roses. These gatherings were a tradition, a tether to family, but lately, they felt strained, like a melody played slightly out of tune. At the last dinner, Rachel had spread glossy brochures across the table, showcasing luxury condos in Portland's trendy Pearl District. "This one's perfect for a fresh start," she said, her manicured nails tapping a photo of a sleek high-rise. Her eyes lingered on Daniel, who nodded with unusual interest. "Great view," he commented, his tone warmer than it had been all evening. Emily caught the exchange, a fleeting glance, a subtle curve of Rachel's lips, and her stomach twisted. She dismissed it as paranoia. Rachel was single, thriving in her career, and had always been a bit flirtatious. Daniel was just being polite. Wasn't he? George and Clara, meanwhile, doted on Sophie, who soaked up their attention like a sponge. George would spin tales of his fishing trips, while Clara taught Sophie to braid flower crowns from the garden's blooms. But Emily noticed Clara's smile seemed forced, her hands trembling slightly as she passed the mashed potatoes. George, too, was quieter, his usual hearty laugh subdued. When Sophie showed them her latest drawing, Clara's praise felt mechanical, and George's eyes darted to Daniel, as if seeking approval. Emily chalked it up to aging. Retirement wasn't always easy, but the unease clung to her. One crisp October evening, as Emily tucked Sophie into bed, George called with an idea. "Let's do a family camping trip in Silverwood Forest," he said, his voice unusually animated. "Just us, the stars, and some s'mores. Sophie'd love it." Emily hesitated. Silverwood, a sprawling wilderness an hour's drive from Cedar Hollow, was stunning but rugged, its trails winding through dense woods and rocky ridges. She wasn't an avid camper, preferring the comfort of her library's reading nook, but Sophie's excitement at the idea was contagious. "Can we see owls, Mom?" she asked, clutching her stuffed fox. Emily relented, smiling. "We'll try, sophomore." To her surprise, Daniel agreed to join, a rare break from his work-obsessed routine. "Sounds good," he said, his tone almost enthusiastic. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this trip could reconnect them. But the night before, as she packed Sophie's backpack with granola bars, a flashlight, and a compact first-aid kit. Her librarian's precision at work. Daniel's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call, his voice low and urgent. When he returned, his face was grim. "Work emergency," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I can't go. You and Sophie have fun." Disappointment stung, but Emily swallowed it. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile for Sophie's sake. "We'll make it a great adventure." Sophie, oblivious to the tension, chattered about roasting marshmallows. As Emily zipped up the backpack, her fingers brushed the first-aid kit, a habit born from years of anticipating scraped knees and bee stings. She didn't know it yet, but that small act of preparation would soon mean everything. The morning of the trip dawned with a sky so clear it seemed to hum with possibility. Emily and Sophie, dressed in fleece jackets and sturdy boots, waited on their porch as George's silver SUV pulled up. George, behind the wheel, waved with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Clara, in the passenger seat, adjusted her scarf, her movements jittery. Rachel lounged in the back, her designer hiking gear, pristine boots, and a tailored jacket, standing out against the family's practical attire. "Morning, Em," she called, but her smile felt like a mask. As Emily buckled Sophie into the back seat, she noticed Rachel's phone buzzing incessantly. "Work never stops," Rachel muttered, her fingers flying over the screen. Sophie, clutching her binoculars, pointed out a hawk circling above. "Look, Grandpa," she squealed. George chuckled, but his eyes flicked to Clara in the rearview mirror, a silent exchange Emily couldn't decipher. The SUV rolled out of Cedar Hollow, the town's quaint storefronts giving way to the wild expanse of Silverwood Forest. The road climbed, pines crowding closer, and the air grew sharp with the scent of sap. Clara's chatter filled the silence, but her words felt rehearsed. "This is going to be a memorable day," she said, her voice tight with something Emily couldn't place, anticipation or perhaps dread. Rachel's phone buzzed again, and she silenced it with a scowl. George turned onto a narrow, unpaved path, the tires crunching over gravel. Emily's brow furrowed. "Dad, this isn't the main trailhead," she said, her hand tightening on Sophie's. "Just a shortcut," George replied, his tone too casual. "Found a spot the tourists don't know about. Trust me, Em?" Clara nodded, her smile brittle. "It's special," she added, echoing her earlier words. Sophie, absorbed in the scenery, pointed at a deer darting through the trees. "Mom, did you see that?" she asked, her voice bright. Emily forced a smile, but her pulse quickened. The forest felt alive, watching, and the weight of her family's unspoken intentions pressed against her chest. As the SUV jolted to a stop in a deserted clearing, the silence was deafening. No other cars, no hikers, just the endless whisper of the pines. Emily's instincts screamed, but she pushed the fear down. This was her family. They loved Sophie. They loved her. Didn't they? Rachel stepped out, her boots gleaming, and slung a suspiciously light backpack over her shoulder. George and Clara followed, their own bags barely filled. Emily gripped Sophie's hand, her librarian's mind cataloging every detail, every anomaly. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. In the heart of Silverwood Forest, Emily Harper senses a chilling shift in her family's demeanor. As the trail grows treacherous, cryptic glances and half-spoken truths unravel the facade of a loving family. With her daughter Sophie by her side, Emily must navigate a web of deception before it ensnares them both. The Silverwood Forest loomed around Emily Harper and her daughter Sophie like a living cathedral, its towering pines casting dappled shadows across the uneven trail. The air was sharp with the scent of moss and resin, and the distant call of a raven echoed through the canopy. Emily, her librarian's instincts honed for detail, clutched Sophie's small hand, her pulse a steady drumbeat of unease. The camping trip, meant to be a joyful family escape, felt increasingly like a march into the unknown. Her father George, mother Clara, and sister Rachel led the way, but their every word and glance seemed to carry a hidden weight. Sophie, 8 years old and brimming with curiosity, skipped along the path, her binoculars swinging from her neck. "Mom, do you think we'll see a bear?" she asked, her voice bright despite the morning's chill. Emily forced a smile, brushing a stray curl from Sophie's face. "Maybe a squirrel or two," she teased, though her eyes darted to the adults ahead. George's broad shoulders were tense, his usual hearty banter replaced by curt instructions. "Keep up, Soph," he called, his voice lacking its usual warmth. Clara, trailing beside him, fiddled with her scarf, her fingers betraying a nervous energy. Rachel, in her pristine hiking gear, lagged behind, her phone buzzing incessantly in her hand. The trail, barely a path through the underbrush, wound deeper into the forest. Emily's unease had begun in the car, when George veered onto an unmarked road, dismissing her concerns with a wave. "It's a hidden gem," he'd said, but the deserted clearing where they'd parked felt more like a trap than a treasure. Now, as the group pressed forward, the forest seemed to close in, the sunlight struggling to pierce the dense canopy. Sophie pointed at a cluster of mushrooms, her excitement a stark contrast to the adults' strained silence. "Look, Mom, they're like tiny umbrellas." Emily nodded, but her attention was on Rachel, who silenced another phone notification with a scowl. "Work never stops, huh?" Emily ventured, hoping to ease the tension. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing for a split second before softening into a practiced smile. "Just clients," she said, tucking the phone into her pocket. "You know how it is." But Emily didn't know. Rachel's real estate deals were lucrative, but this urgency felt personal, not professional. Clara, overhearing, chimed in with forced cheer. "This is going to be such a special day, Sophie," she said, her voice brittle. It was the third time she'd used that phrase, and each repetition grated on Emily's nerves, like a warning bell she couldn't quite decipher. George halted at a fork in the path, consulting a crumpled map. "This way," he declared, pointing to a steeper trail that vanished into a thicket of ferns. Emily's brow furrowed. "Dad, are you sure? This doesn't look like the main route to the campsite." George's smile was tight, his eyes avoiding hers. "Trust me, Em. I've been here before. The view's worth it." Clara nodded, her hand brushing George's arm in a gesture that felt more like a signal than affection. Sophie, oblivious, tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Can I walk with Grandpa?" she asked, her enthusiasm undimmed. Emily hesitated, her maternal instincts warring with her desire to keep the peace. "Stay close," she said finally, releasing Sophie's hand. As Sophie scampered to George's side, Emily caught another glance between her parents, a fleeting, conspiratorial look that sent a chill down her spine. Rachel fell into step beside Emily, her perfume cloying in the crisp air. "Relax, Em," she said, her tone almost mocking. "You're acting like we're leading you to the gallows." Emily forced a laugh, but her mind raced, cataloging every anomaly, the light backpacks, the cryptic exchanges, the detour into nowhere. The trail grew steeper, roots and rocks making each step a challenge. Emily's sturdy boots gripped the earth, but she worried about Sophie's smaller frame. "Slow down, Dad," she called, her voice sharper than intended. George glanced back, his expression unreadable. "She's fine," he said, but his grip on Sophie's shoulder seemed too tight, his pace unrelenting. Clara's chatter filled the silence, a stream of anecdotes about past camping trips, but her words felt hollow, a distraction. "Remember when we got lost in Yosemite?" she said, laughing. George didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Rachel's phone buzzed again, and this time, she didn't bother hiding her irritation. "For God's sake," she muttered, typing furiously. Emily's patience snapped. "Who's texting you out here?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion. Rachel's fingers froze, her face a mask of surprise before she recovered. "Just a colleague," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Checking on a deal." Emily's eyes narrowed. "In the middle of the forest?" Rachel's smile was a thin line. "It's nothing, Em. Drop it." The air grew heavier, the forest silence pressing against Emily's eardrums. Sophie's laughter, as she pointed at a squirrel darting up a tree, was the only sound that felt real. But even that was drowned out by Clara's voice, now tinged with an odd urgency. "We're almost there," she said, her eyes darting to George. "It's going to be unforgettable." Emily's stomach twisted. The phrase, repeated yet again, felt like a code, a signal she was meant to miss. Her librarian's mind, trained to spot patterns, screamed that something was wrong, terribly wrong. The trail opened onto a rocky overlook, the forest giving way to a breathtaking view of a river snaking through the valley below. The drop was steep, the edge unguarded, and Emily's heart lurched as Sophie ran toward it. "Sophie, stop," she shouted, lunging forward. George caught Sophie's arm, pulling her back, but his smile was cold, his eyes locked on Emily. "Just showing her the view," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Clara moved closer, her hands clasped tightly, while Rachel lingered at the rear, her phone now silent, but her posture tense. Emily's breath caught as she scanned their faces. George's calculated calm, Clara's forced serenity, Rachel's barely concealed agitation. The overlook felt like a stage, the family's roles rehearsed, but not for her benefit. Sophie, sensing the shift, clung to Emily's side, her binoculars forgotten. "Mom, why's everyone acting weird?" she whispered, her voice small. Emily knelt, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Soph," she lied, her hand trembling as she smoothed her daughter's hair. Clara's voice broke the silence, soft but piercing. "Sometimes, Emily, we do things for the family's sake," she said, her eyes glistening with something that wasn't quite sorrow. George nodded, his hand still on Sophie's shoulder. Rachel stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You've always been so predictable," she said, her words dripping with disdain. Emily's blood ran cold. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, and her family, her parents, her sister, were no longer allies but strangers with secrets she couldn't yet unravel. At a treacherous overlook in Silverwood Forest, Emily Harper faces a horrifying truth. Her family is conspiring against her and her daughter, Sophie. As their masks fall, a desperate escape begins, fueled by a mother's love and a child's courage. Can Emily outwit their deadly plan before it's too late? The wind howled across the rocky overlook, tugging at Emily Harper's jacket as she stood frozen, her daughter Sophie pressed against her side. The Silverwood Forest, with its endless pines and jagged cliffs, stretched out below, the river in the valley glinting like a distant promise. But the beauty was a cruel illusion. Emily's heart pounded, her librarian's mind piecing together the chilling puzzle before her. Her father George, mother Clara, and sister Rachel stood in a loose semicircle, their faces stripped of the warmth she'd once trusted. The air crackled with unspoken intent, and Sophie's small hand trembled in hers. George's grip on Sophie's shoulder lingered, his fingers too tight, his smile a hollow caricature. "Just look at that view, Soph," he said, his voice flat, his eyes locked on Emily. Clara, her scarf fluttering in the gusts, stepped closer, her expression a mix of resolve and something darker, guilt, perhaps, or fear. Rachel, her designer boots scuffing the dirt, hovered at the edge, her phone now silent but her posture coiled, like a predator waiting to strike. Sophie's whisper cut through Emily's racing thoughts. "Mom, I'm scared," she said, her hazel eyes wide, reflecting the storm brewing in Emily's chest. Emily's instincts screamed to run, but her legs felt rooted to the stone. Every detail, their light backpacks, Clara's repeated mantra of a special day, Rachel's furtive texts, clicked into place like the final pages of a grim novel. This wasn't a camping trip. It was a setup. "Dad, let Sophie go," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. George's smile didn't waver, but his grip tightened, making Sophie wince. "Relax, Em," he said, his tone patronizing. "We're just having fun." Clara's voice, soft but piercing, shattered the pretense. "Sometimes, Emily, we make hard choices for the family," she said, her hands twisting together, her eyes avoiding Sophie's. Rachel stepped forward, her lips curling into a sneer. "You've always been so naive," she said, her words venomous. "Always in the way." Emily's breath hitched as the truth slammed into her. Her family wasn't just distant, they were dangerous. And Sophie, her bright, curious daughter, was caught in their crosshairs. Sophie's small frame stiffened, her binoculars dangling forgotten around her neck. "Grandpa, you're hurting me," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. Emily's maternal fury surged, drowning her fear. She yanked Sophie free from George's grasp, pulling her daughter behind her. "Stay back, Soph," she ordered, her eyes darting between the three adults. Rachel lunged, her nails digging into Emily's arm. "Don't make this harder," she hissed, her face inches from Emily's. "It's already done." Emily's mind raced, her librarian's logic battling panic. Done? What was done? She scanned the overlook, the sheer drop just steps away, the forest's dense maze their only escape. Clara moved to block the path, her gentle demeanor replaced by a cold determination. "We didn't want it to come to this," she said, her voice breaking. George's silence was louder, his stance rigid, his eyes devoid of the fatherly warmth Emily had known. Sophie clung to Emily's waist, her small body shaking but her voice steady. "Mom, they're not our family anymore," she whispered, her words a gut punch of clarity. The wind carried a distant rustle, but Emily's focus narrowed to Rachel's grip, the pain sharpening her resolve. She twisted free, shoving Rachel back with a force she didn't know she had. "Run, Sophie," she shouted, grabbing her daughter's hand and bolting toward the trail. George lunged, his fingers grazing Sophie's jacket, but Emily's momentum carried them into the trees. Branches snapped underfoot, the forest swallowing their footsteps as shouts echoed behind. "Get them!" Rachel's voice was shrill, laced with desperation. Emily's lungs burned, her boots slipping on pine needles, but Sophie's small hand in hers was an anchor. They veered off the path, ducking behind a cluster of boulders draped in moss. Emily pressed Sophie against the stone, her finger to her lips. "Quiet, baby," she whispered, her heart hammering as footsteps crunched closer. Sophie nodded, her eyes wide but resolute, her bravery a mirror of Emily's own. The forest held its breath, the only sounds the wind and the approaching voices of their pursuers. Crouched in the shadows, Emily strained to hear. Rachel's voice, sharp and furious, cut through the trees. "They can't get far. Daniel's waiting for the signal." Emily's blood ran cold. Daniel, her husband, Sophie's father, was part of this. George's low growl followed. "We should have done it at the cliff." Cleaner. Clara's voice, trembling but resolute, added, "It's for the debt, George. For our future." The words seared Emily's soul, each syllable a betrayal. Debt? Future? Her family had sold her and Sophie for money, and Daniel was the architect. Sophie's whisper, barely audible, broke Emily's spiral. "Mom, I heard Aunt Rachel on the phone with Dad last week. They said we wouldn't be here long." Emily's heart shattered, not just for the betrayal but for the burden Sophie carried. Her 8-year-old daughter had sensed the danger, piecing together fragments of adult malice. Emily pulled Sophie closer, her lips brushing her daughter's forehead. "You're so brave," she murmured, her voice thick with tears she couldn't afford to shed. "We're getting out of this." The footsteps receded, the voices fading into the forest hum. Emily's mind raced, her librarian's precision mapping their next move. Her phone, tucked in her jacket, had no signal. Silverwood's depths were a dead zone. The main trail was miles away, the terrain unforgiving, but staying still meant capture. She scanned their surroundings. The boulders offered cover, but the trail back was exposed. A narrow ravine, barely visible through the ferns, sloped downward, promising a hidden route. It was a risk, but so was waiting. "Soph, we need to move," Emily whispered, checking Sophie's face for injuries. Her daughter's cheeks were streaked with dirt, but her eyes burned with determination. "I can do it, Mom," Sophie said, clutching her binoculars like a talisman. Emily's pride mingled with fear. She was asking so much of her child, but Sophie's strength was undeniable. They crept toward the ravine, Emily's hand steadying Sophie over the uneven ground. The forest watched, its silence both ally and adversary. As they descended, Emily's thoughts churned. Daniel's late nights, his coldness, Rachel's lingering glances at family dinners, it all made sense now. Her sister and husband were entwined, their affair a foundation for this monstrous plan. Her parents, drowning in some unspoken debt, had been bought, their love for her and Sophie traded for a payout. The insurance policy, $2.5 million, taken out after Sophie's birth, flashed in her mind. It wasn't protection, it was motive. The realization fueled her, each step a defiance of their betrayal. The ravine narrowed, the air damp and heavy with the scent of earth. Sophie moved with surprising agility, her small frame navigating roots and rocks. "This way, Mom," she whispered, pointing to a flatter path. Emily followed, her ankle throbbing from a stumble but her focus unwavering. The forest vastness was both their shield and their prison, but Emily clung to one truth: she would protect Sophie, no matter the cost. Behind them, the echoes of pursuit had faded, but the danger was far from over. The trap was set, and Emily and Sophie were running out of time. Hunted by her own family in the depths of Silverwood Forest, Emily Harper and her daughter Sophie cling to each other, their bond a beacon in the darkness. With betrayal exposed and danger closing in, Emily's resolve hardens. Can a mother's love and a child's courage lead them to safety before their pursuers strike? The Silverwood Forest was a labyrinth of shadows, its pines whispering secrets as Emily Harper and her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, navigated the narrow ravine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, the faint gurgle of a hidden stream their only guide. Emily's heart pounded, her ankle throbbing from a misstep, but Sophie's small hand in hers anchored her to purpose. The betrayal of her family, her husband Daniel, sister Rachel, and parents George and Clara, burned like a wound, their plan to kill her and Sophie for insurance money a truth too monstrous to fully grasp. Yet, in the forest's oppressive silence, survival was all that mattered. Sophie moved with a quiet determination, her binoculars bumping against her chest, her hazel eyes scanning the terrain. "Mom, it's flatter over here," she whispered, pointing to a path where the ravine widened. Emily marveled at her daughter's resilience, a strength that belied her age. "You're amazing, Soph," she said, her voice hoarse but warm. Sophie's faint smile was a spark in the gloom, but her words carried a weight that pierced Emily's heart. "I knew something was wrong with Dad and Aunt Rachel," she said softly. "I heard them whispering about money." Emily's throat tightened. Sophie had carried this burden, piecing together fragments of adult treachery, yet here she was, guiding her mother through the wilderness. "You're so brave," Emily murmured, squeezing her hand. Her librarian's mind, trained to organize chaos, churned through their options. The main trail was miles away, their phone useless without signal. The ravine offered cover, but every rustle, a squirrel, a falling branch, set her nerves on edge. Rachel's furious shout from the overlook, Daniel's waiting for the signal, echoed in her mind. Her husband was out there, part of the trap, and time was slipping away. The ravine sloped downward, the ground slick with mud. Emily's ankle screamed, but she gritted her teeth, leaning on a branch Sophie had found, its rough bark a makeshift crutch. "Tell me if you're tired, Soph," she said, scanning her daughter's dirt-streaked face. Sophie puffed out her chest, her voice firm. "I'm strong, Mom. We can do this." Emily's pride mingled with guilt. She was asking so much of her child, but Sophie's courage was a lifeline. They pressed on, the forest vastness both a shield and a cage, its silence broken only by their shallow breaths and the distant hoot of an owl. Hours passed, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows that blurred the path. Emily's knowledge of survival, gleaned from library books on wilderness navigation, kept them moving. She tracked the sun's position, steering them roughly eastward toward the main trailhead. Sophie scouted ahead, her small frame slipping through tight gaps, her binoculars now a tool for spotting danger. "No one's behind us," she reported, her voice steady but her eyes flickering with fear. Emily nodded, but the weight of their isolation pressed harder. If they didn't find help soon, nightfall would make escape impossible. A faint snap in the distance froze them. Emily pulled Sophie behind a fallen log, her hand over her daughter's mouth. "Shh," she whispered, her pulse roaring. Footsteps crunched, slow and deliberate, accompanied by muffled voices. "They can't have gone far," Rachel's voice hissed, sharp with frustration. George's low rumble followed. "We need to finish this before dark." Clara's voice, quieter, carried a tremor. "What if we're wrong?" Emily's stomach churned, her mother's doubt was fleeting, drowned by greed. The voices faded, but the threat lingered, a noose tightening around them. Emily's mind raced. The ravine was too exposed, they needed a new route. She spotted a cluster of dense ferns leading to a thicker part of the forest, where the trees might hide them. "We're going that way," she whispered, pointing. Sophie nodded, her trust absolute. They crawled through the ferns, the damp leaves brushing their faces, until the forest enveloped them. The ground was uneven, roots snagging Emily's boots, but the cover was worth the struggle. Sophie's small hand never left hers, a tether to hope. As dusk settled, the temperature dropped, the air biting at their exposed skin. Emily's jacket was torn, her ankle now a dull, constant ache. Sophie shivered, her fleece too thin for the night ahead. "We'll rest soon," Emily promised, her voice a lifeline for them both. She spotted a hollow beneath a massive cedar, its roots forming a natural shelter. They crawled inside, the earth cool but dry. Sophie nestled against her, her warmth a reminder of why Emily fought. "Mom, will Dad ever come back?" Sophie asked, her voice small in the dark. Emily's heart fractured. How could she explain that Daniel, the man who'd once carried Sophie on his shoulders, had orchestrated their demise? That his affair with Rachel, fueled by a $2.5 million insurance policy, had turned love into a transaction? She chose her words carefully, stroking Sophie's hair. "Dad made bad choices, sophomore. He can't be with us anymore. But I'll always be here." Sophie nodded, her face buried in Emily's chest. "I heard Aunt Rachel say they'd be free after we were gone," she whispered. Emily's tears fell silently, her resolve hardening. They would survive this for Sophie. The night deepened, the forest alive with unseen rustles. Emily's watch, its face cracked but functional, showed midnight. Exhaustion clawed at her, but sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford. She rummaged in Sophie's backpack, finding the granola bars and water bottle she'd packed. They shared a meager meal, the crunch of oats grounding them. "We're close to the main trail," Emily said, more to herself than Sophie. "We just need to keep going." Sophie's eyes, heavy with fatigue, shone with trust. Together, she said, her voice a vow. At dawn, a faint glow pierced the canopy, guiding them eastward. Emily's ankle was swollen, her crutch splintering, but Sophie's quiet encouragement, "You can do it, Mom," pushed her forward. The forest thinned, the sound of a distant stream growing louder. Emily's heart leapt as they stumbled onto a gravel path, a signpost marking the main trailhead. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. A figure emerged ahead, a park ranger, his green uniform a beacon. "Help!" Emily called, her voice raw, waving frantically. The ranger, a grizzled man named Tom, rushed over, his eyes widening at their disheveled state. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside Sophie, who clung to Emily. "We were attacked," Emily gasped, her strength ebbing. "My family, they tried to hurt us." Tom's face hardened, his radio crackling as he called for backup. "You're safe now," he said, wrapping a blanket around Sophie. Emily sank to the ground, her body screaming, but her grip on Sophie never faltered. The forest had tested them, but they'd emerged, battered but unbroken. As the wail of sirens approached, Emily held Sophie close, her daughter's heartbeat a rhythm of survival. The betrayal had stripped away her trust, but it had forged something stronger, a bond with Sophie that no one could break. The ranger's radio buzzed with updates, police en route, a medical team dispatched. Emily's story, fragmented but urgent, spilled out. The overlook, the conspiracy, Daniel's role. Tom listened, his jaw tight, promising justice. For now, Emily focused on Sophie's warmth, knowing their fight was far from over, but certain they'd face it together. Having escaped the deadly trap set by her family, Emily Harper and her daughter Sophie now faced the crucible of justice. As the truth unravels in a courtroom, Emily's resilience and Sophie's courage shine, paving the way for a new beginning. Can they rebuild from betrayal's ashes and find a family forged by love, not blood? The hospital room in Cedar Hollow smelled of antiseptic and hope, a stark contrast to the damp, shadowed ravine Emily Harper and her daughter Sophie had fled hours earlier. Emily, her ankle in a brace and bruises blooming across her arms, sat propped against pillows, Sophie curled beside her. The 8-year-old's face, streaked with dirt but serene, was a testament to their survival. The Silverwood Forest had tested them, its pines witnessing their escape from a family turned predators. Emily's husband Daniel, sister Rachel, and parents George and Clara, who'd conspired to kill them for a $2.5 million insurance policy. Now, safe but scarred, Emily steeled herself for the next battle, justice. The door creaked open, and Detective Maria Martinez entered, her notepad in hand, and her expression a blend of empathy and resolve. "Mrs. Harper, can you talk?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Emily nodded, her librarian's precision guiding her as she recounted the nightmare. The cryptic camping trip, the chilling moment at the overlook, Rachel's venomous words, and the overheard plot involving Daniel. Sophie, guided by a child psychologist in the next room, added her own account, her small voice detailing Rachel's phone calls with Daniel about getting rid of them. Martinez's pen moved swiftly, her face tightening with each revelation. The investigation moved like wildfire. By the next day, Daniel, Rachel, George, and Clara were in custody, their arrests sending shockwaves through Cedar Hollow. The town, usually abuzz with gossip about harvest festivals, now whispered about betrayal and greed. Interrogations peeled back the conspiracy's layers. Daniel and Rachel, lovers for over a year, had orchestrated the plan, exploiting George and Clara's gambling debts with a promise of $500,000. The insurance policy, taken out after Sophie's birth, was their prize, with Sophie's death meant to eliminate a witness. Emily's heart ached at the cold calculation, but her resolve hardened. She would see them answer for it. The trial, 6 weeks later, was a media storm. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters. Emily, still limping but unbowed, entered with Sophie, whose hand trembled but whose eyes were steady. The courtroom was a crucible, the air heavy with anticipation. Daniel sat stone-faced, his once charming features hollow. Rachel's designer polish was gone, her glare defiant. George and Clara, aged beyond their years, avoided Emily's gaze, their silence a confession. The gallery buzzed, but Emily focused on Sophie, whispering, "We're stronger than they are." Emily's testimony was a beacon of truth. "I trusted them," she said, her voice clear, resonating in the hushed room. "My husband, my sister, my parents, they tried to take my daughter's life and mine for money. But love, Sophie's love, kept us alive." Her words landed like stones, the jury's faces softening with empathy. Sophie, with the psychologist's support, took the stand, her voice small but piercing. "Grandpa held me too tight. Aunt Rachel said they'd be free when we were gone. Mom saved me." The simplicity of her truth silenced the room, a few jurors wiping tears. The defense scrambled, Daniel claiming coercion, Rachel blaming desperation, George and Clara citing financial ruin. But Sophie's overheard conversations, corroborated by phone records, and Emily's detailed account were ironclad. The prosecution's evidence, texts between Daniel and Rachel planning the accident, bank statements showing George's debts, sealed their fate. On the final day, Daniel erupted, shouting, "You ruined everything, Emily." Rachel's venom followed. "You were never enough." The judge's gavel silenced them, but Emily's calm gaze spoke louder. She'd won by surviving. The verdict came swiftly. Daniel and Rachel received 20-year sentences for conspiracy to commit murder, George and Clara 12 years each for their complicity. As the gavel fell, Emily exhaled, the weight of betrayal lifting, replaced by a quiet strength. Outside, Sophie hugged her, whispering, "We did it, Mom." The town's support enveloped them. Neighbors left casseroles, the library staff sent cards, but the wounds of trust would take longer to heal. 6 months later, Emily and Sophie stood on a rocky beach in Rockport, Maine, the Atlantic's waves crashing against the shore. They'd left Cedar Hollow, its memories too heavy, for a fresh start. Emily had taken a job at a cozy community library, its shelves a haven of stories and second chances. Sophie, now 9, thrived in her new school, her laughter a melody that warmed their small rented cottage. The move, suggested by Emily's colleague Laura, a domestic violence survivor who'd become a friend, was a leap of faith that paid off. Therapy with Dr. Lena Carter helped them navigate the trauma. Nightmares still haunted Emily, Rachel's sneer, Daniel's cold eyes, but Sophie's resilience inspired her. "I get scared sometimes," Sophie admitted one evening, clutching her stuffed fox. "But we're safe now." Emily hugged her, their bond a fortress. "We'll always be safe together," she promised. The cottage, filled with Sophie's drawings and Emily's books, was a sanctuary, its windows framing sunsets that felt like promises. Mark, a kind-hearted bookstore owner in Rockport, became a gentle presence. He'd stop by the library, sharing coffee and stories of his travels, his quiet respect for Emily's strength a bomb. One day, he joined them for Sophie's birthday, a small party with Laura, her sister, and Sophie's new friends. The cake was chocolate, the laughter genuine. As Sophie blew out her candles, Mark spoke softly to Emily. "You and Sophie, you've shown me what real courage looks like." Emily smiled, her guard lowering. Not for romance, but for friendship, a step toward trust. That evening, watching the oceans glow, Emily reflected. "Family isn't blood," she told Mark, her voice steady. "It's the people who choose you, who stand by you." Sophie, playing nearby, looked up, her smile a mirror of Emily's hope. The terror of Silverwood, the courtroom's weight, had forged them anew. They'd faced betrayal's abyss and climbed out, hand in hand, building a family not of lineage but of love. In a distant prison, Daniel and Rachel's alliance crumbled, their shared guilt breeding resentment. George and Clara, isolated in their cells, clung to justifications, never reaching remorse. But in Rockport, Emily and Sophie thrived, their scars proof of survival. The library story hour, where Emily read to wide-eyed children, and Sophie's new friendships were chapters in a life reclaimed. They learned that justice wasn't just a verdict, it was the courage to live, to love, to begin again.